Welcome to Mind Mastery for Wealth with Rose Thompson. I'm the founder and CEO of Mind Mastery for Wealth. For persons new to my channel, Mind Mastery for Wealth is an innovative educational and research company that focuses on an integrated, holistic approach to help human beings create and achieve their life and business goals in the areas of financial, wealth creation, health and well-being, as well as personal growth and empowerment. Several events that are critical, that are necessary to transition us from the old system to the NESARA, GESARA era continues to unfold in the public space at a very, very rapid pace. Events especially that are related to the political and geopolitical aspect of this great plan that is unfolding in the background. The execution of the strategy is absolutely brilliant. Pieces of the plan are now appearing and fitting into this puzzle, if you will, of the activities that are unfolding behind the scenes. Although I have not created a video in a while, I continue to observe very, very keenly the events that are unfolding that could potentially signal the ongoing implementation of the key benefits that will be available to us under NESARA, GESARA, since that is my area of focus. Two key events, two very critical events occurred in August. One is the BRICS Summit, the 15th Summit of BRICS that was held in Johannesburg on August 22nd to 24th, 2023. And we saw the expansion of BRICS. And this is so significant because what this is indicating is the de-dollarization of the US currency no longer being potentially the world's reserve currency. The public invitation of Saudi Arabia is significant, particularly significant, because what that is signaling is potentially the end of the petrodollar, the end of the US currency as the world reserve currency. So very, very key. It was widely anticipated that BRICS would have announced a common currency, a common token. It did not occur, or did it not? By this, we should be aware that the way the strategies are being executed, the players behind the scenes are using very, very creative approach to execute the various events. The other key event that occur is that of that arrest with the famous mugshot, very historic, because what that is indicating or continues to indicate or continue to establish precedent, which is so very important for the events that will unfold later on from this great plan. And it is significant as well because it is potentially signaling how do you introduce evidence legally into the public space. So very, very key events continue, as I indicated, to unfold. In this video, I'm going to share with you key articles that are potentially signaling the ongoing implementation of the key benefits that will be available to us under NESARA, GESARA. And I'm sharing these articles to encourage you that, yes, indeed, NESARA, GESARA is real and the key benefits continue to be implemented. I'm going to share with you an article on debt forgiveness, so important to many of us, the ongoing financial crisis, the banking crisis, the debt market with the US Treasury. I'm going to also share articles on real estate collapse. This is from on the GESARA side, the BRICS expansion, the massive emergency alert test, which is scheduled for October 4th. I'm looking at my notes. I'm going to suggest a potential timeline for which the revaluation of currency, global currency reset, that transition, full transition into the NESARA, GESARA era will occur. Yes, I'm going to suggest a timeline, and I'm going to close with from the educational perspective, actionable information that you can take to minimize the risk of inflation and maximize your return on investment for your financial assets, especially your investment savings, your retirement savings, your 401k, your IRA, and the Canadian equivalent, the RRSP, and the TFSA. Allow me a moment to share my screen. NESARA, GESARA. NESARA represents the most groundbreaking reformation to occur not only on our planet, but throughout our planet's entire history. That's to give you an indication of how impactful NESARA will be. NESARA is abbreviated for National Economic Security and Reformation Act. There are some sources that suggest that the abbreviation is for National Economic Stabilization and Recovery Act. Either definition that is used, the benefits should essentially be very similar, and the principles that govern NESARA should also be similar. GESARA is the global version of the Act and is abbreviated for Global Economic Security and Reformation Act. Included in NESARA, GESARA is expected to be a revaluation of currency, where most countries will revert to their national currency. The currencies will be set at parity 1-to-1, and that is essentially leveling the playing field, especially for trade. So within the revaluation, there'll also be a global currency reset. In essence, a revaluation of currency and a global currency reset. NESARA, I should highlight, is specific to the US, while GESARA is related to the other countries on the planet. NESARA, GESARA will also include the greatest wealth redistribution for humanity in modern history. There are approximately 20 key benefits that are suggested will be available to us on the NESARA, GESARA. For persons new to my channel, I'm encouraging you to review my earlier videos, especially parts 1 to 4, where I discuss in details these key benefits. Key benefits 1, 2, and 4 are highly dependent on key benefit number 3, where the Federal Reserve System, it's important that that system be eliminated. Federal Reserve System is not a part of the federal government. It's actually owned by private bankers, and these bankers are, for the most part, foreigners. Good information has suggested that the Federal Reserve System has already been backed into the US Treasury, and the new banking system, the international banking system, is referred to as the quantum financial system. Some sources are suggesting that the term or the name NESARA, GESARA, along with the quantum financial system, will change. However, the principles behind NESARA, GESARA, as well as the quantum financial system, should be very similar. Key benefit number 1, debt forgiveness. I'm going to share with you an article on the student loan. The student loan category is not stated here, but this is one of the categories that is suggested will be zeroed out or canceled out. Student loan, because that is the category of loan that is continuously in the information, it continues to be in the public space. For key benefit number 4, where NESARA creates, NESARA in specific creates a new US Treasury rainbow currency backed by gold, silver, or other precious metals. In my next slide, I'll share with you evidence of this. And later on, I will share an article on the gold-backed currency, especially from the BRICS countries. Let me highlight here that the information I'm sharing in this and my other videos is for educational purposes only. I'm not operating as a financial advisor, tax professional, or medical doctor. I'm suggesting that any information, financial investment decisions that you're considering, you consult a financial advisor, and for your tax-related matters, you consult a tax professional. I'm well aware that tax-related matters are also handled by financial advisors. And for your medical decision, I'm suggesting that you consult a medical doctor. HR 2435, House of Representatives, Bill 2435, introduced on March 30th, 2023 to the House. This is described as Gold Standard Restoration Act. And this is very interesting because in August 1971, the US was taken off the gold standard. So now it is approximately 22 years later where it is anticipated and it is expected that the US, perhaps in another year, will the gold standard will be restored. The goal is very important, as it is also anticipated within NESARA, GESARA environment that there will be, as I highlighted earlier, reset of each countries, the 209 countries that are signatories to NESARA, GESARA will go to parity that is 1-to-1 or near parity with the US. The new US gold asset-backed currency, digital, actually the term now that is being used is not a currency, but instead it is a token that is anticipated will be used. Previous HR Bill 9147, which was introduced on October 7, 2022, the description is very interesting. It defined the dollar as a fixed weight of gold and for other purposes. However, as you have noticed, that the description has now been changed to Gold Standard Restoration Act. That's very informative. And it would appear that the state of Texas may well be the state to adopt a gold asset-backed currency. Their House Bill 4903 was introduced on March 10th, 2023, described as relating to the issuance of gold and silver specie and the establishment of a digital currency based on gold and silver, authorizing a fee. Companion Senate Bill 2334 was also introduced. These are two visual evidence to support the transition or the restoration of a gold-backed currency, which is a very key component of NESARA for the US and GESARA for the BRICS, the other countries. This is a very interesting article reported by MoneyWise, caption, "We can't pay. A growing wave of student loan borrowers are likely to refuse to resume repayment in October. New survey finds, here's why many are on the brink of boycott." There's power in numbers. I find this article to be interesting because we are aware that the power goes back to the people. And I'm observing to see how the student loans will be dealt with. Will the people refuse to pay? And if they refuse to pay by boycotting, is this how the student loans will eventually be canceled? The power goes back to the people. Read briefly, as US President Joe Biden stalls student loan forgiveness plans, means repayment is set to resume on October 1. September 1 was when the pause ended especially for the accrual of interest. And here, an October 1 resumption of payment. A growing number of student loan borrowers are claiming they either cannot or will not pay the debt back. This is very, very interesting, and I want to highlight this part that is very key as well, that the obligation, possible consequences for not resuming payment could include, in some circumstances, lenders can even garnish up to 15% of the borrower's wages to repay loans in default. I'd like to highlight that it is important that we observe our obligations and observe when the formal announcement of NESARA, GESARA will take place, where the key benefits, the full implementation of the key benefits that are suggested to be available to us, including student loans, being canceled or zero out, is done. Let me also highlight that although I'm sharing the sources with you, it is important for you to review available information for yourself. It is important as well for you to question everything and everyone. It is key to help you to develop your own critical thinking. And I welcome a conversation with anyone who has good quality information that is not consistent with the information that I'm sharing in this, as well as my other videos. Sharing now articles on the ongoing banking collapse, which is necessary, which is critical to transition us into the new quantum financial system. Bank of California to buy troubled PacWest Bancorp, which came close to failing earlier this year. Bank of California has agreed to buy PacWest Bancorp in an all-stock transaction, bringing an end to months of speculation about whether PacWest could survive on its own after failures of 3 other regional banks this spring. Those 3 regional banks were Silicon Valley Bank, Silvergate Capital, and First Republic Bank, which failed, I believe, in early March, April. On Friday, July 28, 2023, FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, reported failed bank information for Heartland Tri-State Bank. What is very interesting about this article is that the announcement was made on a Friday, and this appeared to be the pattern to minimize chaos, to minimize financial instability. Friday, the announcement is made, discussion occurs over the weekend, and by Monday, a decision would have been taken. So here, Heartland Tri-State Bank was closed by the Kansas office of the State Bank Commissioner. No advance notice is given to the public when a financial institution is closed. Dream First Bank National Association assumed all deposit accounts and substantially all the assets. No mention is made of the debts. All shares of stock were owned by the holding company, which was not involved in this transaction. What is interesting is it would appear, and based on my observation, that the banking system continues to be collapsed in a very controlled manner, a controlled demolition. That appears to be the strategy that is being used to collapse the banking system. There appeared to have been a pause in the collapse of banks in August. In September, and this is very recent. This is September 15th. I'm recording this video on September 16th with editing. It should be available on the 18th, 19th. The third largest US bank, Citigroup, in layoff talks after management restructure. Isn't that very interesting? Citigroup is reportedly considering job cuts, with insider sources indicated that support personnel in these two banking areas, compliance and risk management, are particularly vulnerable. Moreover, there's potential for layoffs among technology staff members whose responsibilities overlap. Note that this is the third largest US bank, and this is reported on the 15th. The 15th was a Friday. Note the trend. The reporting takes place on a Friday. And here is an impact. Citigroup's Europe boss departs amid CEO Fraser's sweeping overall. Christine Braden has held various roles in Asian Europe Groups Inc. Europe unit, is leaving the US lender amid Chief Executive Officer Jane Fraser's comprehensive reorganization of the top management structure to boost revenues, this article states. Again, September 15th, Friday afternoon. I believe to minimize the reporting takes place on a Friday, which is the pattern to minimize chaos and instability. In response to the failure by the regional banks, here's what regulators are proposing. Regulators unveil sweeping changes to capital rules for banks with $100 billion or more in assets. And this is published by CNBC on July 27th. On Thursday, US regulators unveil a sweeping set of proposed bank changes to banks' capital requirements to address evolving international standards and the recent regional banking crisis. While the heightened requirement applies to all banks with at least $100 billion in assets, the changes are expected to impact the banks, the biggest and most complex banks, the most regulators have indicated. And this is all in response to minimizing the losses that traditionally taxpayers have borne. What I find, what is very exciting for me about this article is this is the area of my doctoral research, my dissertation. My dissertation is situated within the context of Basel III. And let me just quote here. The changes designed to boost the accuracy and consistency of regulation will revise rules tied to risky activities, including lending, trading, value in derivatives, and operational risks. And my doctoral research focused on operational risks. So this is very exciting for me. According to a notice from the Federal Reserve Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and Federal Deposit Insurance. Long expected by banks, the proposed rules seek to heighten regulation of the industry after two of its biggest crises in recent memory, the 2008 financial crisis and the March upheaval in regional lenders, the Silicon Valley Bank, the Silvergate Capital, and the First Republic Bank. These rules incorporate parts of the international banking regulators known as Basel III, which was agreed to after the 2008 crisis that has taken years to roll out because the banks just did not want to adopt these standards. So very interesting. This is very exciting for me because I'm observing my academic doctoral work in real time. And let me go read a little bit further for you. In response to the failure of Silicon Valley Bank in March, proposal would force more banks to include unrealized losses and gains from certain securities in their capital ratios, as well as compliance with additional leverage and capital rules. And more importantly, it effectively eliminates a regulatory loophole that regional banks enjoyed, while larger firms with at least $250 billion in assets had to include unrealized losses and gains on securities in their capital ratios. Regional banks won a carve-out in 2019 that helped mask deterioration in Silicon Valley Bank's balance sheet until investors and customers spark a deposit exodus in March, practically a run on the bank. So that is the response, and let me highlight just the impact on 8 global systematically important US banks, such as JP Morgan and Bank of America, would see a roughly 19% increase in the amount of capital they would have to hold. And this is being reported by Insider Intelligence. And the implications for this, holding more capital to minimize the loss that traditionally taxpayers have had to bear. And in this high interest rate environment, the increased cost of capital represents an increased cost to the institution and a reduction on the profitability, the bottom line. So very, very interesting scenarios are dynamics. And I continue to observe to see what impact the increased capital will have on the banks. Will we, and it is anticipated that we will experience further collapse of the banking system, which again is necessary to transition us into the new quantum financial system, the NESARA, GESARA era. Let's look at the response from the credit rating agencies. Moody's cuts ratings of 10 US banks and puts some big names on the downgrade list. And this was reported on August 8 by CNBC. Key points: among the smaller lenders receiving an official rating downgrade were M&T Bank, Pinnacle Financial, BOK Financial, and Webster Financial. Major lenders include Bank of New York Mellon, US Bank Corp, State Street, Swiss Financial, Cullen/Frost Bankers, and Northern Trust are now under review for a potential downgrade. And Moody's has also changed its outlook to negative for 11 banks, including Capital One, Citizens Financial, and Fifth Third Bank Corp. Very, very interesting. And Fitch warns it may be forced to downgrade dozens of banks, including JP Morgan Chase. JP Morgan Chase is the biggest bank in the US by asset size. And this was reported on August 15th. Fitch Ratings analysts warn that the US banking industry has inched closer to another source of turbulence or risk of sweeping rating downgrades on dozens of US banks that could even include the likes of JP Morgan Chase. Think about the implication of JP Morgan Chase collapsing. It would be certainly more than catastrophic, probably cataclysmic. JP Morgan Chase is considered to be, I'm quite sure, one of those banks that is too big to fail. And interestingly, again, my doctoral work, I'm right. I'm truly blessed. I'm observing my doctoral research in real life, my real time rather. My work examined the announcement of operation losses on the cost of capital of US banks. So I've gotten the opportunity to observe in real time, as opposed to collecting data historically. And here is, it's not only the banks that have received a downgrade. US credit rating downgraded. Here's a sharp move. Deterioration has been highlighted in standards of the governance for the US. And this was reported on August 1 initially by Reuters. Interesting about the article is that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said she disagreed with Fitch downgrade in a statement that called it arbitrary and based on outdated data. Isn't this interesting? I included this article mainly because of JP Morgan Chase being a bank and the reputational risks that could incur from this association. Here, US Virgin Island, USVI says JP Morgan notified Treasury of more than $1 billion in Jeffrey Epstein human trafficking transactions after he died. Those who are aware are aware. This article is highlighting the connection, and all the pieces of this great plan are fitting very nicely in place. So JP Morgan Chase notified the Treasury Department of more than $1 billion in human trafficking transactions by Jeffrey Epstein, and this dates all the way back to 16 years after the notorious, and this was done, the notification was done to the Treasury Department after the notorious sex predator killed himself in 2019. A lawyer for the US Virgin Islands told a federal judge at a hearing. And she stated that Epstein's entire business with JP Morgan and JP Morgan's entire business with Epstein was human trafficking. Mimi Liu, an attorney for the Virgin Islands, told Judge Epstein's entire business with JP Morgan and JP Morgan's entire business with Epstein was human trafficking. Isn't this interesting? Those who are aware are aware. Although the amount that is being sought, the Virgin Islands is seeking at least 190 million in damages in the case, which will go on trial on October 23rd. If Rakoff does not grant summary judgments to either side. The amount is punitive in comparison to the asset size of JP Morgan. However, again, I included this to highlight the potential reputational risk which could incur from the association with this individual. Very, very interesting how the pieces are fitting very smoothly together. Let's look at what is happening to the stock market. Here is this Dow sheds nearly 300 points on Friday. S&P 500 and NASDAQ suffer second straight week of losses. And this is on Friday, September 15th, Friday. Here's that Friday pattern, Friday cycle again. Stock fell Friday as investors wrap up a volatile week ahead of the Federal Reserve policy. You may or may not have noticed that the collapse of the stock market is ongoing, 3-step forward, 2-step backward, a very controlled manner. This article on the US Treasury market is one of the articles, is one of the important paper I will keep with my valued possession. This is so historic. I'm absolutely excited to share this article with you. It is all about the rise and fall of nations. Approximately the life cycle is 250 years. The US was birthed had its independence in 1776. 2026 will be the 250-year life cycle of the US. We are observing the rise and fall of nations. I am absolutely excited to have been afforded the opportunity to be observing this in real time and not reading about it historically. We are indeed living on one of the most influential timelines in modern history, to observe the fall of one great nation and the emergence of another structure, which is being suggested will be a multipolar world. Naturally, the US will continue to have a leadership role, but this is just really historic. And here this article is saying this hasn't happened on the US Treasury market in 250 years. Now it has. The 10-year Treasury bond is on track for a third year of losses in 2023, something that hasn't happened in 250 years. And this is highlighted of US history. Again, truly remarkable. In short, it has never happened, says strategists at Bank of America. It has never happened. And it is about to happen at the end of the life cycle of this great nation. I'm going to encourage you to review, I believe it's my part 1 of 4 series, where I did a background on the rise and fall of great nations, and I included a Pluto cycle and the cycle of great nation, which is 250 years. So we're actually observing a very historic period in the US history. And here, charge 2, never in the history of the US Republic have US Treasury returns fallen 3 years in a row. We are observing the collapse of this great nation and the emergence, I'm quite sure, of a strong US. 1787, this is published by Bank of America Global Investment Strategy, Bloomberg Global Financial Data. 2023 year-to-date, third consecutive year of decline, 17% down in 2022, worst since 1788. I'm so excited to be able to observe in real time as opposed to reviewing historic data. This is really an exciting moment for me. And at this point, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so. I should have done this earlier, and I'll do this again at the end of when I'm closing. Like this video, because I understand the algorithm allows the like to reach more persons, and that is my intent, and to share the video with the content with any person who you believe the content will add value to their lives. So truly historic. If there is no other support or evidence that I've shared with you that we are indeed transitioning to a NESARA, GESARA era, this article is great evidence to support what is unfolding. This may well provide visible evidence that the Fed is being collapsed. Here it is, and this is on September 15. Fed losses breach 100 billion as interest costs rise. We are well aware, and this may be for public optics, that the Federal Reserve System has been backed into the US Treasury for well over a year now, and all of this is coming, just being presented for public, to the public for optics. Federal Reserve losses breach a 100 billion mark. Central bank data released on Thursday show that they are likely to go a lot higher before the ink reading stops. US Central Bank, notice it is has identified this, the Federal Reserve as the central bank, is continuing to pay out more interest costs than it takes in from the interest it earns on bonds it owns, and from the services it provides to the financial sector. While there's considerable uncertainty around how it will all play out, some observers believe Fed losses, which began a year ago, could eventually as much as double before abating. Is this the collapse? Is this the public collapse of the Federal Reserve System, which began a year ago? And I think that is a period, or maybe a little bit longer, that we were informed that the 2020, the Federal Reserve System was back into the US Treasury. All of this being played out now for the public. This is truly, truly remarkable. It was widely expected in 2021 that Evergrande would have collapsed, and this would have been one of the triggers to usher in the NESARA, GESARA era. It didn't happen. Now, almost a year and a half later, probably, here's the article in CNBC reported on August 17 that China's property giant Evergrande files for bankruptcy protection in Manhattan Court. As a matter of fact, a friend and I had several conversations about Evergrande and the filing for bankruptcy, the pause, making payments, that kind of pattern. And we observed for a while, and then Evergrande, the news no longer covered Evergrande. So here we are. China's heavily indebted property developer Evergrande on Thursday filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy protection in a US bankruptcy court. In a filing to the Manhattan Bankruptcy Court, the firm sought recognition of restructuring talks underway in Hong Kong, Cayman Islands, and the British Virgin Islands. The world's most indebted property developer defaulted in 2021 and announced an offshore debt restructuring program in March. Isn't that very interesting? Very, very interesting. Now look at what is playing out for Country Garden. China's Country Garden dodges another default in relief for property sector. Similar pattern recognition is important in this movement, in this great awakening. China's Country Garden made interest payments on US dollar bonds hours ahead of a grace period deadline, similar pattern that Evergrande pursued. A person close to the firm said, pulling back from the brink of default for the second time in 4 days and bringing some relief to the country's crisis property sector. It is being played out as though this is really being managed, controlled demolition. Here in this article on the NESARA side, BRICS, on the BRICS 15th summit held in Johannesburg, South Africa, between the period August 22nd to 2024, published This article published by CNBC on August 24th at the end of the summit. Emerging Economies Group BRICS invites 6 new members, including Saudi Arabia and Iran. The BRICS Economic Coalition of Emerging Markets has decided to extend membership invitation to 6 nations. BRICS, abbreviated for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is set to invite Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to join. And we have been told that this has occurred already behind the scenes. Now, the article is saying that their membership should take effect from January 1st, 2024. The invitation of membership by Saudi Arabia is very significant because this signals the end of the debt of the petrodollar and also the de-dollarization trend continuing. It's also significant because Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE represents the 3 of the world's largest oil producers. With the expansion of BRICS, BRICS currently will represent around 40% of the world's population and more than a quarter of the world's GDP. So this alliance is emerging, and they have highlighted multipolar governance structure. So it is very interesting to observe how this is unfolding, how this alliance is unfolding. Will the USA join BRICS? That's a very interesting question. A combined 23 countries have formally applied for BRICS membership, including the 6 that I mentioned earlier. Other major African players includes Nigeria and Ghana, Nigeria and Ghana. So very interesting how this is unfolding. It was widely anticipated that BRICS would have announced a common, at this summit, a common currency or token backed by gold would have been announced by BRICS, but it did not happen, or didn't it? We should recognize by now that the way the players execute their strategy, they use very, very creative approach. It's not usually done in a straightforward manner. Let's review this article to determine whether this is signaling the direction in which the currency for the various nations will be announced. And it is, I'm going to suggest that it is Russia indicated last year, probably the year before, definitely last year, that it had backed its ruble by gold. And we are aware that all the countries, the BRICS countries, have already backed their currencies by gold. And there is the position that the countries will revert to using their national currency for trade. And this is what India has done. So this could potentially be signaling not necessarily the common currency, but the countries using their own national currency. India just ditched the dollar and used its own currency to buy 1 million barrels of oil from UAE. And this is significant because the de-dollarization trend, this article highlights, moved one step further this week as India's top oil refiner used a local currency to settle an oil trade with a seller in the United Arab Emirates. The two also agreed to implement a real-time payment mechanism to simplify cross-border transactions. Very, very interesting. Based on my observation of events over almost 3 years now, it is apparent that it's all about 2024. It is apparent that the strategies that are being pursued are very similar to the strategies pursued by Andrew Jackson that went all the way back to the election. The People's voice must be heard, and the way the people's voice is heard is by their vote. So it is appearing that all along it was going to be all about 2024. I'm suggesting a possible timeline for the transition. I'm going to say fully transition to NESARA, GESARA, or near fully transition of NESARA, GESARA, the revaluation of currency, the global currency reset. The possible timeline is within the next 12 to 14 months. Shortly thereafter the of 2024, or possibly within the first quarter of 2025. Yes, I'd love to welcome your comments on this. I am well aware that we are weary. It has been long in the making. We've made it this far. I'm encouraging you to keep the faith, keep the thoughts positive. We're almost there to experience one of the greatest wealth redistribution in modern history. There are visible signs appearing in the public that, yes, indeed, we're going to be experiencing a period of great wealth, peace, and prosperity. September, there are several sources that are suggesting that key events are scheduled for September and October. The fall historically, the fall has been a period of collapse. The Great Depression occurred within this period. So let's continue to observe to see how things unfold. So long window, in terms of timeline, it goes to November 2024 and shortly thereafter. Short window within the next 6 months, with significant activities unfolding in the public space in September and October. I'm sharing information from an educational perspective only. Actionable information as it relates to minimizing the impact of inflation on your financial assets, your investments, your savings, especially your retirement savings, the 401k, your IRA, Canadian equivalent of the RRSP, the TFSA, that during inflationary periods, precious metals, and in particular gold, has been a great store of value. It's a great hedge for inflation, and it has been an asset that has been used for wealth creation. Given what we are aware of, given the BRICS countries backing their currencies by gold and other precious metals, in view of the evidence that has the HR bills that have been submitted to the HR and House of Representatives on the NESARA side for the US, there is good evidence to suggest that the prices of gold and in particular silver will be increasing significantly. There are several sources have suggested as well that the prices of gold metals have been suppressed for a long time, and it is anticipated that the prices will increase. So now may be a great time for you to review your portfolio and consider ensuring that your financial assets are inflation protected, inflation proof, possibly backed by precious metal, gold and silver. This is only for educational purposes only. I'm creating an awareness. I am offering no recommendations on this channel, and I am suggesting that you also consult with a reputable financial advisor before you make your decisions. One of the key events that we are aware of that will occur is that of the EBS to transition us into this NESARA, GESARA era. And I'd like this article appeared in the USA Today on August 2026. I'd like to close with this article, caption, massive emergency alert test will sound alarms on US cell phones, TVs, and radios in October 2023. This is a test. This is only a test, but it's going to be one very big test. And my question is it really a test? On Wednesday, October 4th at 20:20 p.m. ET, every TV, radio, and cell phone in the United States should blare out the distinctive jarring electronic warning tone of an emergency alert accompanied by a notice along these lines. This is a nationwide test of the emergency alert system issued by the Federal Emergency Management Agency covering the United States from 1420 to 1450 hours ET. Looks like 30 minutes. This is only a test. No action is required by the public. It is truly remarkable to be afforded the opportunity to observe the end of the life cycle of a great nation and the emergence of, in this instance, a multipolar world. And to be able to share the events with you, I feel absolutely humbled and grateful. I acknowledge that I'm fascinated, but I'm also frustrated, as you are, because we thought we would have already transitioned into the NESARA era, and by now we're enjoying this great wealth redistribution, first in modern history for humanity, and enjoying the peace and prosperity. However, it is almost there. We are well on our way, and there is good indication that based on the events that are unfolding in the public space, that it is just a little bit longer. Given the magnitude of the events associated and the activities associated with this great plan, this global operation, I appreciate the length of time, although I'm frustrated. I look forward to enjoying this. With this, let me highlight that I have placed in the description below this video the contact details that we can be reached with any queries that you may have about the information I've shared in this video and my other videos. That contact information, you can also use that for consultation. I look forward to that. I've placed in the description below this video the website address for Myanmar's Refor Wealth. I'm encouraging you to visit that website. It has great resources to help you to develop a mindset in terms of possibilities and abundance. I'm encouraging you to subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so, and to like this video, only because I understand it allows the algorithm to reach more persons, and that is my intent. I'm encouraging you as well to share this video with any persons that you believe the content will add value to their lives. And thank you so much for visiting my channel, and I look forward to sharing quality information with you.